Hello, hello. Okay, good. All right. I was just making sure that everyone can see me. Huh, There's this strange effect I'm trying to get rid of, but that's causing me to lag. But here I am, regardless. Yeah, here I am. Okay, let me get right to it. Good night, everybody. And so I wanted to start with some of the words that I hear leaders say, right? Dr. Tamu, I feel misaligned, overwhelmed, cognitive overload, uh, many meetings, but no momentum, lonely, betrayed. These are some of the phrases that I hear and that leaders express to me when we are discussing leadership and when we are moving through my rear framework. Yeah. And so I wanted to talk about what leadership can do to self and really look at, are we really ourselves or are we an avatar? So leadership becomes performance rather than authentic practice. So that's the first segment of the conversation that we are having tonight. Now, let's look at what is authentic leadership and is it possible? The question really is authentic leadership possible when you have multi stakeholder environments, perhaps multi jurisdiction environments, which means you have even more stakeholders that you have to engage with? And you begin to wonder, how authentic can you be if you have to engage all of these stakeholders? Now, remember, if you do have questions or comments, you can share them. Yes, I can see them here if you do share a comment or a question, right? So, what is authentic leadership? How authentic can you be? How do you move from performance to transformational practice? These are some of the questions that leaders have. And the truth is that uh, you have to be able to focus on the idea that the practice that you engage in is as authentic as your strategy requires. Because the entire goal of leading and transformational leadership is really to create strategy that allows you to achieve the goals of the organization and the vision that you have for transformation. And it is difficult for persons to understand the level of authenticity. The truth, though, is that authentic conversation, authentic dialogue will be essential for strategic achievement. And the depth of that authenticity will be determined by your goals or KPIs at the time. And perhaps we become confused because we wonder, or maybe we are unsure as to what authentic actually means. Authentic does not necessarily mean that you share how you feel at every moment, at every time. You share your vulnerabilities on stage at all times. Authenticity is measured and is suitable for the strategy or plan that you have. Now, let's talk about why the Rear Leadership Framework, my proprietary Rear Transformational Leadership Framework, is different. It's different because I focus in this framework on leadership being a solo endeavor, as in only endeavor, singular, while most traditional leadership engagements, frameworks, practices, they focus a lot on followership. But the truth is that leadership is a soul, as in SOLE, and soul, as in SUL, endeavor. And I always begin with that. And it is the grounding in this idea of leadership being a soul sport that requires introspection first before we can even discuss anything about followership. Now, I know that in your life and in growing up, as we would say, that you would have heard that, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. And though this might sound demeaning, it's not about being demeaning. It's really just, sharing that as people grow into their habits, it's difficult to change them or have them change their habits. Similarly, when you are engaging in transformational leadership, it's difficult for people to change. We don't have to go into a lecture about resistance to change and change management tactics. The truth is that the only person that is required to change first in the REAR framework is the change of self. And so the REAR framework, my REAR framework, really delves into vision casting and the type of CEO leader that you need to be to achieve your strategy, to achieve your vision. And so leadership is really a solo endeavor before we even begin discussing anything, any element of followership and what that means. And then when we look at um, A, which is my agile articulation, we really begin to visit the idea of what is articulation. And for many of us, articulation starts and stops with the meeting, right? The email, the memo, the minute. And that might be the lowest form of articulation for someone who is a strategist. And the art of agile articulation is very important. It's an imperative to be able to master that because it is only through the effective agile articulation across stakeholder groups, etc., individuals, team members, employees, peers. It is only when you are effective in articulating your vision in an agile manner that you can really effect transformational leadership. And most of your communication, be that vision, visual, written, oratory, it really should be about doubling down on selling the vision and articulating and incorporating people that you need into the strategy that is required to achieve the vision. Now, sometimes, particularly in our island states, we are very careful about articulation. And there are a number of factors for that, particularly if you are in a political role or quasi political role. We know that in the SIDS environment, especially in the Caribbean, anything that you say can become make you a target. It might make you a target if we're to be honest. And so in these spaces, sometimes even if you are not in a political or quasi political leadership role, that heaped upon organizational politics is the macro environment of politics, like party politics, and how your actions, your transformative actions, your articulation of the vision that you have for the organization or institution that you lead, that might become, you know, pulled apart in the public domain through the lens of, party politics. And so we face, whether or not you're in a political role, our stakeholders tend to view many actions and most conversations through this dual lens, which creates, a minefield really for you. And the idea too that with rear we really look at articulation of the vision of the transformative agenda. And I explore quite a bit how we can utilize technology as a thought mate in strategy management and alignment between strategic vision and operational imperatives. And so there is that conversation as well. And then, as we begin to transform the spaces we are in, because remember, the REAR framework is a transformational leadership framework. And so as we begin to transform these environments and buck the status quo to the extent that we can, we really have to begin thinking about legacy, not just for us, but for the institution as well. How do we retain and preserve the hard work of our teams in transforming the institutions that we lead? And not that as soon as we've gone, because we have been that driving force that steers culture, that all of our efforts are in vain the moment that we leave the institution. And so RARE looks at resilient reengineering from that perspective. I also delve quite a bit into leading in chaos. And why I say chaos is because, from the transformational lens, when you are dismantling and rebuilding and rethinking, it can feel very chaotic to your team, to the organization. And we explore those techniques so that we can re engineer towards strategic goal achievement in a way that limits the chaos while we rebuild. And so that is part of the resilient re-engineering conversation that we have. And you realize that I've said conversation because REAR, what's great about REAR, of course, I'm biased because it's my framework, is that REAR is accredited because it has some staples, some substantive elements, some foundational pieces that we build a conversation upon in the rooms where I facilitate REAR, right? And so even though it has these anchors, there's enough space in the conversation of REAR transformational leadership to ensure that we tackle every leader's issues around these four areas, right? Of radical reimagination, agile articulation, resilient reengineering, and emotional mastery. And what I have found, why I created the framework, is that in executive coaching and in these conversations that I'm having with leaders, whether they're in teams, whether they're one on one, most of the difficulties or challenges that they are facing, they are actually tied back to one of these tenets or these anchors. And, we look at emotional mastery and we really, I think, debunk the idea that emotional mastery means that one is unfeeling. The truth is that leadership requires some very, very difficult decisions. Leadership results, transformational leadership in particular, because you are changing from the norm, that type of leadership puts you in the spotlight. It forces you to make changes in the organization that are generally sometimes wildly unpopular. It requires sometimes that you have to step back and really engage in some serious compromise in service of your bigger goal. And to you, the transformational leader, that might seem like a loss actually at the time it's happening. And so there are a lot of opportunities for uh, emotional distress, if I'm to be honest. There's a lot of emotional distress that occurs and a lot of hard decision making that must transpire when you are attempting to transform any space, and particularly organizations that have been around for decades. It becomes even more difficult. And so, how do you shield yourself and master your emotions and debunk the idea that just because you might have to make decisions that are quite unpopular and difficult, that this is synonymous with being unfeeling, and how to disentangle those two things. And so I've been really receiving some stellar feedback on Rear, the idea that Rear allows for mastering techniques that are transferable in most situations while allowing for exploration of specific case studies in the space of training, engagement, coaching, or facilitation. Yeah. Now, I don't know if you know, but if you don't, you're going to know now. I am taking Rear to the sea, and I am having the Rear Transformational Leadership Cruise at Sea. And I'm really excited about it. It's happening in November. So the sailing is in November. And we are spending 7 days non-visa cruise. If you know, you know, non-visa cruise in the Caribbean, right? But of course, we wouldn't take up your entire time at sea with just classes. So I'll bring up the flyer and share my screen with that. And I'll answer some of the questions that I've received about Rear and the cruise while I converse with you. Right? Okay, so let me share my screen. And of course, if you have any questions about Rear, transformational leadership, the cruise itself, post a comment, okay? Post your comment. All right. So let's share the screen. It's telling me share screen is easiest with two monitors. All right. So here we are. So we set sail November 16th to 23rd. And some questions are, well, am I going to spend my entire cruise, my entire cruise in the classroom? No. What we've done is this sailing has a sea day. So the rear accredited training, so the rear transformational leadership framework accredited training is 4 modules, comprises of 4 modules, each 2.5 hours. And of course, there is introspection that one has to do between modules. And so we have a C day on the 18th. And so we use that C day to tackle modules 1 and 2, which are radical reimagination and agile articulation. So you'll be at sea and you'll be with me for the morning and afternoon sessions, but you still have time because each session is 2.5 hours long. I find that, by the time we have the questions and the case studies, we might go to 3 hours. And then on the following day, we'll be in Barbados, and that day will be dedicated, the morning from 8 to 11 will be dedicated to resilient re-engineering. And the following day in Martinique, that is our final session, 8 to 11, right? 9, 10, 11. 9, 10, 11. I've given 3 hours max, right? Uh, for emotional mastery. Now, who accredits the program? The program is accredited by the CPD group out of the United Kingdom, and this accreditation is, transferable worldwide. You will receive 10 credits. So this is great if you're doing like SHRM, or if you are in any profession that requires additional continuing professional development credits. Now, in terms of sailing, we have a logistics partner. So if you're on St. Kitts, all of the information about the logistics partner is in the flyer. We are partnering with Tranquility Vacations, and they are handling your cruise, accommodation, and flight while you get to the cruise, wait for the cruise, and return from the cruise, disembark. And then there is an additional fee, which you will pay to me and my company for the rear workshop. So we do have payment plans for the enrollment component of rear, as do as does Tranquility for their cruise and flight and accommodation package. Now, if you don't want to book with Tranquility, that is fine. If you are outside of St. Kitts and Nevis, it may be easier for you to travel to the cruise yourself. Get to the point, the departation area, which is the Dominican Republic, right? The country we're departing from, right? On your own. Okay. And so that is fine, but you enroll with us to save your workshop seat, and then you choose the sailing. If you need the flyer is here. If you want to look it up, we'll be on the MSC Opera, and that sailing is out of Dominican Republic, November 16th to 23rd, so that you can look at that. And of course, there are other options. The pricing on the flyer is quoted in for an inside cabin, but there are other cabins available. All right. And so I just wanted to share that. So a lot of the questions were in my inbox, what if I need someone to sail with me? Well, you should bring someone to sail with you, because remember, cabins are double occupancy, but of course, they don't need to enroll in rear. You can enroll in rear, you'd fill out that enrollment form and make your travel arrangements separately for you and your companion, right? In terms of payment plans for enrollment into REAR, we have a full payment option, which has a discounted rate. We have a two payment option, and we have a seven installment option, which are quite reasonable. Cruise, of course, with your cruises, they have payment plans available as well. Okay. Let me see if I have any other questions here. So if you have, oops, okay, I'm back on LinkedIn. I was having some issue there, it said. So, why I love REAR and why I created REAR. I created REAR, Transformational Leadership Framework, because I have been in many leadership roles. In the United States, I've been in leadership roles. In the Caribbean, I've been in leadership roles in many industries. So, education, in retail, in automotive. I've led um, multi jurisdiction teams, I've led corporate teams, and I always have had the bent of always been focused on transformation. And most traditional leadership training and engagements, they don't speak about transformation. And also in the Caribbean context, in the rooms that you're in, no one speaks about the lack of resources, which are prevalent in organizations in the region and smaller development states, right? No one speaks about the entrenchment of status quo. I think more so in the Caribbean region than in many places where innovation is not something that we often discuss, if at all. And so when one is trying to innovate and transform in entrenched systems, regardless of the industry in the region, one needs a toolbox, and REAR is that toolbox. Of course, REAR, other transformational leadership frameworks or other leadership engagements, they don't speak to the reality of the cognitive overload and the humanity behind leadership. Like I said in the beginning, leadership is less about followership than it is about your soul, soul. And it really takes a reimagination of one's self and one's soul, one's soul, to really uh, create the type of enduring, and that's another thing, enduring transformation that you require and you envision, particularly in the Caribbean region where political cycles tend to determine what remains, what sticks versus what shifts. So every political cycle, especially if there's a change in government, many things shift. And so if you cannot understand how to strategically re-engineer in a way that provides legacy and light to the hard, grueling work that you are doing to transform, your board is doing, your senior management team, your team on the ground, your operational team. If you have no framework or structure or tactics or strategy to ensure this work remains, I mean, it would be heartbreaking. And so I just felt that, of course, there are many brilliant leadership frameworks and leadership theories, but RARE is grounded in lived experience and in the reality of persons who are leading in Caribbean contexts and Caribbean jurisdictions. Okay. And so that's it for me. I hope you can join me on the Rear Leadership Cruise. Let me know in my DMs if you need the flyer, you'd like the enrollment link, which also has much of the information that is on the flyer. We only have 20 spaces. Why only 20 spaces on a massive ship? Because the work that I like to do is always intimate work. I like to transform thought, and that is impossible. At least I think it's not possible with a huge cohort, right? I really want this to be enduring work. So I look forward to your engagement in the comments, and I look forward to conversations that begin in the inbox. Bye bye. And you can visit tamubrown.com if you want to set up a partnership call with me. You can do so there as well. Bye bye, everybody.